Issue that it is for Jews in my generation. So I guess my folks, may they live long and be well, when they get this, they pay attention. When I get it, well, I give it a look. But this gets pitched by Jews under the age of 40. It's not on their radar. The Jewish community understands that ultimately the best interest of Israel is a strong, vibrant American democracy that's not in an economic hole, that's not politically divided. Israel is more vulnerable, a weak and depleted and overextended America than she is by America who knows what the hell she's doing. So we're going to vote for a guy who seems to know what the hell he's doing. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is going to be Joyce, and she's going to be speaking about the Pakistani and Afghani.
Okay, we go from nationalism to tribalism. And thank you for your comments, Bruce, about the nationalism, because that is a real issue in the world today. I first visited Pakistan early December of 1979. The Iranian revolutionaries had just seized our embassy in Tehran in November. 4 days before our arrival in Pakistan, the American embassy in Islamabad had been burned in reaction to false reports that an American had attacked the holy shrine in Mecca. And we arrived just in time for the Shia observance of Muharram, when emotionally charged people thronged the streets, beating their chests, engaging in self-flagellation to recall the martyrdom of Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, who had opposed dictatorship and oppression. It was a dangerous time to be there. Our embassy in New Delhi had told us to keep a low profile if we decided to go to Pakistan. That's not too easy to do. Everywhere we went, people stared in amazement because all other Americans had left the country, every single one. So what were we doing there? We were on our long-awaited trip around the world, and we didn't want to disturb our plans. We did, however, cancel our plan to visit Iran. We visited Lahore and then flew up to Peshawar, landing at a large Air Force base, originally built by the Americans to facilitate our U-2 spy flights over Russia. A few of you are old enough to remember Gary Powers, the young people know. Our friend borrowed a car from a Pakistan Air Force colonel, and we drove through the tribal areas, seeing the small village factories where they produced handmade guns. Those shops would later help to arm the Mujahideen. Then we traveled through the Khyber Pass, which was a desolate, barren area traversed by camel caravans, donkeys, and the colorfully painted Pathan trucks. Today, there are continuous settlements of Afghan refugees all the way from Peshawar through the pass to the Afghan border. Along the curving mountain roads, we observed huge pyramid-shaped concrete blocks with iron hooks on top. When we reached the border, we asked the military guards what they were. They said they're dragon's teeth, designed to deter military tanks, and they had recently been put on the sides of the road so that they could be quickly installed as barriers to stop the Russian tanks that would soon be coming. The border guards led us across into Afghanistan, and we traveled up to Jalalabad. The Afghans and Pakistanis we encountered were talking about the impending Russian invasion. Once the Iranians had taken our embassy, they reasoned that America would be distracted, so the Russians could take the opportunity to invade Afghanistan and, if possible, Pakistan, so that they could finally get their corridor to the warm water Indian Ocean. We arrived back in the States on Christmas Eve, and the next day, there was the news. The Russian invasion had taken place, and the American government and State Department professed great surprise. I guess we should have told them. For the next 10 years, there would be a hard-fought war between the Soviet troops and the Afghans. At least 1.5 million Afghans would be killed, and the Soviets would be defeated. The Soviet Empire collapsed, and the Central Asian states declared their independence from Russia. More than 3 million Afghan refugees had fled to Pakistan, and another 1.5 million to Iran. And I saw their huge tent cities in the frontier in 1989. The Afghan farms, vineyards, and orchards had been destroyed. Their cities lay in rubble. Yet the Afghans celebrated their victory over the great Russian bear. During that war, the U.S. collaborated with the Saudis, as you've mentioned, to indoctrinate, train, and arm the Afghan mujahideen who fought the Soviets. Saudi imams went to the frontier areas of Pakistan to establish madrasas in which they propagated their ultra-fundamentalist, militant Wahhabi version of Islam. Osama bin Laden was among the Saudis who were welcomed on this jihad. Working with our CIA and Pakistan's ISI, the Mujahideen fought the Russians until Afghanistan became a wasteland. We sent millions of dollars to support Pakistan's military dictator, General Zia al-Haq, who promoted fundamentalist Islam in Pakistan. Prior to Zia's coup, Pakistan had been a moderate and even very progressive state under both Field Marshal Ayub Khan and democratically elected Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. In 1988, I married a Pakistani and moved to Lahore. After 11 years of Zia's military dictatorship, People's Party leader Benazir Bhutto had just been democratically elected as Prime Minister, the first woman Prime Minister in an Islamic country. And we're still waiting here in America for that to happen. There was a tremendous mood of optimism and enthusiasm for the future. 20 years ago, there was a very strong pro-American attitude. Everyone wanted American clothes, American music, and American education. And throughout most of its history, Pakistan had been a strong ally of America and part of various pacts designed to oppose the communist threat. Once the Soviets were defeated, however, the American government thought it was a good idea to send representatives to speak at the American centers to announce the U.S. no longer has any strategic interest in this area. And soon there would be no more AID funds coming in. I was present at such an event, along with many political leaders, including Begum Nasim Wali Khan, a female Pashtun leader of the Awami National Party, their main secular party of the Northwest frontier. She was amazed and said, "You mean after we carry on your fight against Russia for 10 years, you no longer have any interest in us? Or the 3 million Afghan refugees we're caring for on the frontier?" The speaker, sent by our State Department, confirmed that was the case. That was the beginning of the bitterness and resentment that grew in the region, particularly among the Pashtun tribes of Afghanistan and Northwest frontier. And Osama bin Laden would be among those who felt betrayed. For 5 years, the Afghan tribal warlords engaged in a civil war over who would rule after the Russians left. In 1994, Mullah Omar and the Taliban took over Kandahar. The Taliban were students trained in the Saudi madrasas. Many of them were orphans or displaced people of the war. I recall talking with one of our embassy people and asking, "What do you think of the Taliban?" He told me, "We are working with them. We think they may be the only people who can unify and control the country." I asked, what about their treatment of women and fundamentalist views? He said, oh, the Afghans have always been very conservative people. And besides, if they pacify the country, it will enable us to build a pipeline through Afghanistan and Pakistan to the Gulf to carry oil from the new independent Central Asian countries. And that's all a quote. It sounded a lot like the Russians' dream. So we were backing the Taliban. By 1996, the Taliban had succeeded over the warlords, and they proceeded to eliminate poppy production, which they considered to be un-Islamic. Heroin had accounted for much of the foreign exchange that helped to buy weapons during the Soviet war. Now, after we removed the Taliban government in 2001, poppy production increased again. But we now report that it's the Taliban who are supported by the heroin trade. Hamid Karzai, by the way, is a little more honest. He says they can't cut it out because it's half of their income. After 9/11, when Mullah Omar and the Taliban refused to turn over their guest, Osama bin Laden, saying it violated a tradition of hospitality and protection of a Muslim brother, instead of using our own special operations teams, which were even there, to take out Osama bin Laden when we knew where he was, we enlisted the Northern Alliance. They were the same old heroin-trading, gun-running civil warlords. We expected them to take out al-Qaeda while we safely bombed the Afghans from overhead. After 9/11, America also went to President General Pervez Musharraf and asked for his cooperation. Pakistan provided several airfields for the attack on Afghanistan. In exchange, we once again gave Pakistan a lot of aid, which had been cut off during the Democratic government years. And he became the best of our allies. Pakistan did indeed capture and turn over many al-Qaeda, but Musharraf had to walk the tightrope. Because after the Soviets had left Afghanistan, many of the tribal mujahideen working under Pakistan's ISI went to Kashmir, where they engaged in freedom fighter warfare against the Indians for the next 10 years, including the 1999 Kargil War led by Musharraf. The jihadi groups had a long history of working with Musharraf, and while he would do what he could to turn over members of al-Qaeda, he was reluctant to do the same with the Pashtun Taliban. The Pashtuns, or Pathans, are the dominant ethnic tribe in Afghanistan, particularly in the eastern region. The Northwest Frontier province and federally administered tribal areas you hear a lot about, Waziristan and Peshawar agencies, are also dominated by Pashtuns. And borders and central governments don't mean much to them. After Musharraf was removed from power this year by the newly elected Democratic government, America finally decided that enough is enough, and we have started to bomb villages in northwest Pakistan. And there have been over a dozen attacks to date, we mentioned 18, mostly missile strikes by remote-controlled drones. So Robert Neal doesn't have to wait to turn it into a bombing ground. The Pakistani people wonder why we tolerated the dictators double-dealing all those years. And now, when there is finally a democratic, moderate, and progressive government, we decided to bomb their country. Now, America's latest plan in the last few days is that we will buy Chinese-made AK-47 Kalashnikovs to arm tribal militias in this frontier, supposedly to fight the Taliban, and they are the Taliban, and al-Qaeda. The model for this comes from Anbar province in Iraq, where we did successfully arm some Sunni tribes to fight foreign al-Qaeda. But in Iraq, Al-Qaeda were seen as outside troublemakers, whereas among the Pashtuns, they are often known as friends who had fought side by side with them against the Russian invaders and who have been living and intermarrying with them for decades. Some of our generals have warned that we cannot fight in Afghanistan the same way that we have in Iraq because the circumstances are different. Now, General David Petraeus is now the new head of Central Command, which is responsible for the entire Middle East region. Petraeus supports proposed direct talks with the Taliban. You have to talk to enemies. Thank God he's saying that. He said while pointing to Kabul's efforts to negotiate a deal with the Taliban. Just yesterday, a jirga was held between Afghanistan and Pakistan, proposing talks with the Taliban without preconditions. The desire for peace and reconciliation is growing, but will the Taliban be receptive? Afghanistan and Pakistan are both still suffering from the problems of integration of peoples living with arbitrary borders set by colonial powers, as Bruce referred to. In Pakistan, ethnic identity is often more important than Pakistani identity. In the north, there are the Punjabis, in the south, the Sindhis, in the west, the Baloch tribes, and northwest, the Pashtuns. Each of these groups speaks a different language, and each has its own cultural traditions. Afghanistan has the majority Pashtuns of the southeast, mostly a lot of the Taliban are in that area, some Baloch in the southwest, Persian-speaking Shia tribes in the northwest, and Uzbeks and Tajiks in the north. And they all have their tribal leaders, and they struggle for power with each other. Then there are the cross-border tribes. The Baloch are in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. Kashmir is divided between India and Pakistan, and the Pashtuns are in both Pakistan and Afghanistan, and constitute most of the Taliban fighters. Many Taliban want to create a separate Pakhtunistan state, or take over Pakistan entirely. Last December, they killed Benazir Bhutto, a progressive opponent of extremism. And in September, they bombed the Marriott Hotel in Islamabad, 2 hours after her husband's inaugural speech as president.
Joyce,
Yes.
I'm sorry. Your time is up. I can give you 1 minute to wrap up if you'd like.
Okay. So these people have very fierce tribal loyalties. We Americans experienced a terrible trauma when our homeland was attacked on 9/11. It was one day in our lives that none of us will forget. Imagine the lives of the Afghans who have lived with attacks and bombs and explosions for 30 years. Today, Hamid Karzai is referred to as the mayor of Kabul. After 7 years of American presence, Afghans' earlier hopes for a better life after the Taliban have been lost. For the past couple years, the Taliban have been welcomed back into many villages because the people think, as America once did, that at least the Taliban can restore some order and safety. And while we talk about non-proliferation, now we've entered into a nuclear pact with India, providing them with more nuclear fissile material and expertise. And A.Q. Khan has again become a hero. So I've always been proud to be an American. We have a lot to be proud of here. But it's very sad that in recent years, we are now being regarded as the most dangerous nation in the world. I think it's time for us to ask ourselves, what is the price of our empire? What is the price of our fear? What is the price of our paranoia? Is it time to make friends or enemies? Is it time to hold out the olive branch and to release the dove of peace around the world? Is it time to devote our resources to education, health, and construction instead of death and destruction? We are all judged by the decisions we make. It's a law of nature that we reap what we sow. So shalom, assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all.
I would like to open the session, the question and answer session now. Maybe about 30 minutes. So I'm sure a lot of people have a lot to say. So I'd like for you to limit your comments or questions to just 60 seconds, please.
I do have a concern about the issue that you took on Israel and viewing Islamic extremists as criminals. From the research that I've conducted, and I know Professor Diamond and I debate about this all the time, Israel was, from my study in the World Civ class at Georgia Military College, Israel was always Jewish since the time of the 12 tribes. They always modernized themselves, and I took a geography class as well. During that phase of history, the Muslims or the Arab countries, invented algebra. They just stopped. And the second thing is, with respect to Iran, I don't know how you can negotiate with someone who's driven by pure ideologies. And number three, as far as viewing Islamic terrorists as criminals, we made that mistake during the 1990s. With the I'll give you some examples. The Oslo Peace Agreement was complete disasters. The World Trade Center bombing of 1993. The bombings of Kenya and Tanzania, the USS Cole, and it does say in the U.S. Constitution that any attack on a U.S. ship or on U.S. soil is considered an act of war. And as far as I'm concerned, if they want a war, they're going to get all they want.
Thank you. That's some excellent stuff there. Let me try and break this down. First of all, on the when you talk about the history of the Palestinians and the Israeli people, I think Rabbi Diamond hit it on the head when he was talking about the big problem. One of the big problems, of course, is the issue of nationalism. It's not a religious issue, and a very wise man said to me once that history isn't what happened that was important. History is what happened that somebody decided was important. And we can go back and forth endlessly on the history, not only of the Middle East, but of everywhere around the world. The bottom line is we have to deal with the situation as we have it today. I have talked to incredibly generous, sincere Israelis. I've talked to incredibly generous, sincere Palestinians. And I've also talked to the most despicable, prejudiced racists that you can imagine from both sides as well. Being that I don't look like an Arab, being that I'm a white guy, I can go there and I get an earful from both sides. And this is the situation that we have to deal with today. And I believe that there is a realistic solution. Again, I think in the Saudi plan or the Arab League plan, whatever we're calling it, there is the possibility that we can have both an Israeli state as it exists today, and we can have a Palestinian state, and they will exist side by side. Now, you brought up the issue of the multiple terrorist attacks, particularly since Oslo. We have to understand, if they declare war on us, who are we declaring war on exactly? Is this all the Palestinians? Is this Hamas? Is this Hezbollah? Is this Fatah? Who are we declaring war on? What we have to realize is that people that take these extreme actions, they don't necessarily represent all of their people. They are a faction, and we have to deal with them as factions, because as soon as we start saying that all Israelis are occupiers, or all Palestinians are terrorists, or all Iranians are unreasonable, when we get to that point, that's when it becomes impossible to deal with these situations on both a human level and a political level.
Also, please address your questions.
Talking to trying to be like talking to Jordan. You brought up criminals and Muslims. that even modern Muslims are they may not be angry or outraged, but they have a little resentment to us, even sending their brothers or their sisters, whatever the case may be, to, like, let's say Gitmo, and imprisoning them under inhumane conditions. How do you feel we should change this, how do you think we should treat them, even though they're criminals? Should we at least give them basic human rights, as at least to a fair trial and, at least fair captivity and issues like that?
That's another excellent question. And yeah, this gets back to what I was saying about we have to recognize that the rule of law applies to all. I realize that it's a complex situation with many of these cases. In Gitmo, we do have some of the worst of the worst. We also have some people that were completely innocent, and we have some people that were just fighting a war because that's where they grew up and that's their situation. And with Gitmo, Gitmo's going to be gone no matter who's our next president. Now, where they send those people, that's another issue, and where they might be stocking away some more people, that's yet another issue. But again, Gitmo says more about our failings as a nation and our failings in regard to the Constitution and the law than it actually does about the prisoners.
My name is Behzad Afshar Nasri. I was born in Iran, and thanks for some people speaking for people I come from. I served 4 years in the U.S. Navy, and I visited Iran twice. And I don't think we can generalize Iran as being pro-Western or not pro-Western or something, because I've seen a mix of everything. By the way, Israel bombed USS Liberty in 1967, killed 34 people, injured 170 some odd people. So I guess we should just go to war with everything. My point is, and also John McCain's father said it was intentional when they did the inquiry. My question is, what are we not talking about? When Toni Morrison talks about slavery, she talks about liberals that say, I'm colorblind. That is very offensive to her. Now, what are we talking about, not talking about with Palestinians? Look at the initial creation of it. Total refugees in 2000, according to the United Nations, Palestinians were over 3.7 million. Over 1.2 million in camps. This is in 2000. It's been increasing between 3 and 5% every year. In 1947, 55% of Palestine was given away to Israel, when Israel were only 30% of the population and only owned 7% of the land. I mean, let's just look at the source of things and where it has led to. Let's not just, and let's talk about it. I'm not an irrational person, and neither is anyone else here, and neither is anyone else in the world. As a matter of fact, if someone disagrees with me, I have to consider that they have probably thought about that subject probably more than I have. And I think in a lot of cases they have. And so, calling anyone irrational, well, it's Ahmadinejad, when he asks for an inquiry into the Holocaust, we call him a crazy person for that. How come there's no inquiry into the Palestinians who are refugees? How come there's no inquiries into the 33 massacres that happened in 47 to 49? How come no one cares about this stuff? But we have to care about other people. If we care about true humanity, if we care about other stuff like that, then let's care about that. But if we care about politics, if we care about ideology, then let's just be open about it. Let's not hide behind peace, because that's just a bunch of crap. And I would have really liked to see in the Middle Eastern up there on the board. Of the Arab persuasion. I mean, I respect you being Muslim or whatever, but when I say my name and see my color, I'm assumed as a Muslim, and I'm not. But not that it matters. You know, you can go home and go talk to someone and say I'm Bob, and no one cares beyond that. I had to drop out of the United States Air National Guard because I was being called Osama bin Laden after 9/11. That's what I have to live with. That's what Palestinians have to live with. That's what Israelis have to live with. What are we willing to live with? We're talking from a high perch over here in safety, and we think we know something. I think it's a bunch of bull.
Never answered the question why they hit us so much. I don't want to talk about it, right?
It's a statement that I'm just making here. You know,
there was a